So I'll introduce Ram Chandrasegaram, and we'll have a conversation with Ram for about 20 minutes or so, and we'll open for questions. So don't be shy to enter in the chat box any questions, comments, or feedback for Ram as we go through. So Ram is a senior IT executive with close to 25 years of achievement on large transformation programs across private and government sectors in Australia and in the UK. A fun fact about Ram, he built a large Star Wars inspired bunk bed for his son, which dominates his bedroom, and has resulted in most visitors to their home taking a selfie picture with it. I must say that, Ram, I met Ram, I'll probably valid to talk a little bit about, my connection with Ram. I met Ram back in 2006 on my very first SAP project here in Australia. We're both working for client Australian Post, and we stay in touch on and off over the years. I've been lucky to be invited to a Diwali celebration at his beautiful home, whenever I think of Ram, I think of this warm, approachable human with a big smile on his face. So that's the memory that I have. So I think he's very, very appropriate for this topic of human skills over technical prowess, especially with his strong technical background. But I don't want to give too much away, so let me stop sharing so we can have Ram on the spotlight. So Ram, thank you so much for accepting to have a conversation. And let's start with I gave you a little bit of your bio, but it would be good to hear from you a little bit more on your journey, how you became a program manager today at the Bureau of Meteorology.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks a lot, Nat, and really good to talk to everyone. I'm off mute, so I think I'm pretty proud of that part. Yeah, I think you've really summarized it pretty well. I think the only thing I would say is I really started as more of a technology-based person, so really in really hardcore techie land, if you like. And then over time, I guess I sort of, started leading larger and larger teams and whatnot. And probably I'm less hands-on, clearly, but I still have a very much an interest in that technology side. Of course, everything is about business outcomes and value, but I think ultimately having an understanding of that technology side has really helped me, especially in working with more senior stakeholders who want to, sort of unravel what we're doing down under the covers. And you did mention I had some experience in the UK. The only thing I would say is, I was out there for 2 years, absolutely loved it, with my now wife and then girlfriend. And one thing I would recommend to anyone is if it can happen for you and you haven't done it yet, is I recommend having a stint overseas. So that was a great experience. Cheers.
Super. Ram, we spoke when we were talking about how to frame, because I wanted to have a conversation with you, and I knew that you could talk about so many different things, right, related to the manifesto. And looking at the principles, we end up choosing this one, that it's human skills over technical prowess. So would you like to talk about why did you choose this topic? Why this one is the one that you relate the most?
Yeah, I mean, when I had a look at the manifesto, on the website, now I think with the 4 values you've got there, they all absolutely are relevant. But as soon as I saw this one, it sort of resonated with me. I think because throughout my career, I've sort of seen examples of where this has been done well, where it hasn't been done well. And I've absolutely been on, on a journey in this space as well, not pretending to be an expert. So I thought, to me, it's something that's an ongoing challenge, I think, for all of us as leaders. So to me, it's a really interesting space.
Cool. And so some of the key considerations that you keep in mind when managing this principle, or what comes to mind for you?
So I guess the first thing would be to actually authentically recognize that human skills are a valuable area to invest in. It sort of sounds kind of obvious, but when we say it's, really valuable, what I'm talking about is, you're actually investing the time, especially leadership and management or organizational time, develop a strategy, commit to actually looking at a sort of a journey around improving the human skills of maybe a small team or maybe a program or maybe the organization in general. They're actually not small things, as we all know as leaders, that's talking about communications, it's talking about engagement, it's talking about training. It's actually a lot of things that you need to do. And I think we do a lot of those things in the more technology space as a default. And so it's a natural thing to go out and, let's assemble the A team, for example. We all talk about it, let's get the A team. And almost always when we talk about the A team, we're actually looking at a lens of technology. So for example, they've done SAP 20 times, they must be awesome. Or I heard this person's the best Java programmer in Melbourne. It's very rarely I would say with a technical program where we go, but this is the best person to do this because of this human skill. And I think we do it probably in a leadership context. I definitely agree. But as we look at the teams and the makeup of the team, often it is with a more of a bent on their experience in the technical domain. And one of the things, I guess, is the context of the team. So, for me, the teams I'm looking at and working with, it's very large programs. And so the reality is maybe one organization is doing exactly what I just said rarely happens. So in other words, there's this organization that's got this amazing strategy around human skills development, and it's just best of breed. But the reality is on the major programs I'm on, it's really a heavy mix of resources. You've got delivery partners, you could have resources coming from software vendors, you could have independent contractors. So essentially, even though the organization might have a clear strategy, when it comes down to the team level, it's a real heady mix of different opinions and focus. And that's one reason I would say I'm sort of a firm believer in smaller is better. And not just because I'm short, but I really think when you've got those smaller teams, you generally have less misalignment, if you like, in regards to that human skills focus. It's not always there, but one dimension is normally taken out, which is, but my organization does it this way, my organization does it that way. So sometimes a small team can outperform a big team from that perspective. Another aspect, I guess, for me is often what I've seen, and I've done this as well, is you spend all this time on ways of working, like for example, getting the tools, like Confluence, Jira, those sorts of things. And you spend all this time getting those tools in place, and you run integrated planning sessions, every program increment, every quarter. But actually the biggest bang for your bucks personally is the interactions that happen on a day-to-day basis, and they're underpinned by human skills. So again, in other words, you can have all the tools and collaboration, but how do people actually interact with each other when they're walking down the corridor, when they're in a stand-up, when they're actually in a one-on-one? How do they interact? Do they do it respectfully? Are they mindful of the other person's energy? Are they considerate of maybe they've got things going on? Are they actually empathetic? All these different things that we would see as human skills don't always come to the fore when we're really focused on ways of working, as an example. And as a practical level, I think one of the things is to really establish these behaviors as early as possible. And it shouldn't be sort of put on the team. It's really something that is done sort of collaboratively. A way we've done it in the past is really in that early mobilization phase, is really get the teams on the ground, brainstorm, what do we want to stand up for, if you like? What do we think is acceptable? What are the ways we want to interact? But put that lens on the human side, especially, and I think that generally gets a lot better buy-in because it's actually the team that's created those things. And one of the things in particular is what I call, or what would be referred to as self-policing. And so what I mean by that is, it's all well and good to sort of come up with these things, put it on a wall or put it on a Confluence page. The reality is you're not going to be in most, as a leader, you're not going to be in most of the meetings, right? So most of the agile ceremonies are all happening and you're just getting escalations or whatnot. So the reality is you're not going to be there. It can't be policed by you. It can't be, from the top. It's got to be driven from the team on the ground. And so if it's built that way, I think it really helps. It doesn't mean that the leader has an out. what I mean by that is you got to role model the behaviors. And I think, our teams are amazingly smart, obviously, but they're also really sensitive, and they can pick when a leader's saying one thing, but then acting in another way, So, a simple example is, I'm all about, your context. I'm all about understanding your situation and being flexible. And then the moment, you've got a severity one, or the moment you've got a production issue, it's like, no, I don't care that your mum's, sick at the moment, just get into office or whatever. So those things can happen. So as leaders, we need to really be able to show, because otherwise we're not leading, obviously. And I think another aspect, Nat, is for some people, the human skills, they just come really naturally. For other people, it's actually something that, for whatever reason, it could be their personal background, or it could be never had the opportunity. Softer skills may not be coming naturally. And I think in that context, it's really important to support them, because if you try to put a focus on the sort of softer human-oriented skills, and an individual feels, well, they don't have that in their toolkit, what you can actually do is you kind of ostracize them, because suddenly the rest of the team is moving in a path, and for their background, they just feel they're not really supported. So it could be as simple as just mentoring them. It's generally quite obvious, because they'll actually come to you, or you can see it in certain meetings. And obviously you'd be proactively saying, if anyone needs support, let me know. But a lot of it can be just mentoring, but it can also be formal training. There's all sorts of training that most organizations would support. But for me, I think the final thing on that point, Nat, is that, to me, I'm talking all this human stuff, the human and the importance of it. But what I found is, if you actually put a certain amount of focus on it, because you still got to get the delivery done, right? That's what we need to get done. But to me, actually, the delivery side, the very technical side, actually gets an improvement, because the collaboration's there, the network's there, the relationships are there, everything starts to strengthen. And as we know, in a delivery context, the hardest time is when you have issues. And the biggest way to break through issues is through relationships, communication, engagement, all these things that are underpinned by human skills. So to me, it's actually not as simple as saying, I've got another thing to focus on when I really want delivery. Actually, you're getting better delivery. So I think that's just sort of my top level thoughts, Nat.
Beautiful. See lots of people nodding, including myself. Thanks, Ram. Wow. I feel like I'm doing a bit of a recap, but now I'm not going to spend my time. I think I want to listen to you, not to myself. So how about I'll reflect by myself later. How about sharing an example? We spoke, Ren, about a number of stories that he had. One example that comes to mind that we could illustrate, you spoke about very important principles there. Any stories comes to mind that you feel comfortable to share to illustrate some of those aspects?
Yeah. I think probably thinking of sort of a more positive one, and one where it hasn't gone so well. Because, I'm absolutely on this journey as well, guys. I think definitely I can recall a program work we were on, and during that mobilization phase, the typical, storming, forming, norming, really early days, due to the leadership on that program, they actually invested in this space, right? And what it effectively became is we did that concept of shared values. So, for example, we all got in a room, physical room back in that time, and we actually talked about, what do we want to be known for? And it wasn't about, we want to do the fastest implementation of this technology. It was about, we want to be honest, we want to be authentic, we want to attend meetings on time, some very basic things, as well as some really important things that would form the basis for the relationships of the next couple of years while we did that implementation. And that was awesome. And then what happened was COVID hit. And so what was interesting was that gave us a good base already, but we actually augmented what we did. And, there was a couple of things that we did. I think one of them, these are all simple things. So one of the things we said, because we noticed once we went COVID and we're doing virtual, people started not to have the camera. And so then one of the things we just talked about openly was, we obviously in a virtual setting, but we did the same thing, and we said, how do we want to change things? And one of the things we agreed was, we'll all have cameras on, but if you don't want to have a camera on, then at least you'll just say, oh, I'm eating, or today's not a good day for me to have my camera. It's just a courtesy, but it means that as somebody speaking and engaging, they're not thinking, oh, the camera's off because they really don't care. It's like, oh, no, by the way, I'm homeschooling and trust me, you don't want to see what's going on here. So there were those sort of things. I think that was a real positive one. On the more challenging side, again, in a COVID context, I had one individual who basically in meetings would get to a point where if they didn't agree, they would just go off. Like they'd literally end the call and jump off. And they're the sort of things, with the human skills, it's not going to stop those things. Let's be honest, that these sort of things. But what it means is the team itself were able to manage that to a certain degree. Obviously, eventually got escalated and we sort of handled it and we weren't sort of parted ways. But at the end of the day, the team did their best to support the situation and move on. I think that was a good basis. Another thing, I guess, that I've noticed as an example is what we've got to be quite careful about, and I'm really cognizant of this, is when you go out and get somebody to join a program because they are the Uber person, because often you do need to do that. You've hit this particular type of issue and you need the best person, Java programmer, those sort of things. And what often happens is when they roll in, they sort of get on a pedestal almost, and it happens naturally. And that's because, wow, this person's just, look at it, how much code they're cutting and the defects are hardly any defects, whatever it may be. But unintentionally, you could create an environment where that technical person, we're effectively allowing poor behavior. And what I mean by that is if that technology person who's really delivering amazing stuff is not conforming to the norms, isn't operating in a way that's acceptable by the team, what can happen at a management layer is you recognize how much delivery you're getting from that person, and it can actually bias and influence your view. And sometimes we've got to really, take a step back and just say, well, forgetting about their CV for a minute, this is actually destabilizing the team, etc. And then obviously, just like any manager, you've got to sit down with the person and take it forward and discuss it. But I think that's something that has come up several times for me, Nat, this concept of a really, I would call them a heavy hitter is the term I would use when it comes to their technical ability, but maybe just struggling to really conform in a manner that is appropriate to work professionally. So I'm not talking about somebody who's struggling to have this ability to converse to hundreds of people. I'm just talking about basic norms, like not just, turning off Teams in the middle of a meeting. I remember one story was we had this gentleman came into the program and he was a super talented developer, and it was pretty impressive. But what actually happened was his behavior started poorly and it only degraded from there. And, on one occasion, because quite often, to give you an idea, he could almost be abusive, just verbally. So totally inappropriate. And even one time he got so angry, he threw a stapler across the room. And thankfully no one got hurt. He hit the monitor. Needless to say, that color monitor became black and white after that. But what happened is I felt that in retrospect, because obviously at that point then, we sorted it all out and he was on his way. But I think the reality is in retrospect, we were biased. He was so good technology-wise. He was sort of put on that pedestal. His behavior, I felt, wouldn't have been tolerated if he wasn't one of those heavy hitters. And yet that shouldn't have been a consideration, because what actually happened is it destabilized the team dynamics. It's almost like an infection. And it takes so much of your management time as well, to talk to people who have been, annoyed by his behavior, etc. So, there are a couple of things. I think the last thing I'd say around examples is just be careful about stereotyping. So what I mean by that is, and it's same for me to also consider the bias here. And what I mean by that is, they're a developer, they'll be technically minded, they're not interested in human skills, soft skills. So I've got to tread carefully, and it's likely they're just going to be, rolling their eyes. Versus, this person's an organizational change management person, that's their bread and butter, and they're going to be great and love that we're focusing on human skills. The reality is, on some occasions, I've met developers who are really into this stuff. They naturally either want to do it or they can do it. And that's been really powerful for me in the past, because what happens is at the top down, I sort of try to enable the space. So for example, do the things we've just talked about, but it's actually even more powerful when somebody within the team is bottom up driving it. And so that can happen as well. So I think just be careful of stereotypes, I would say. Yeah.
Thanks, Ram. And for me, you are a perfect, I mean, not a perfect, but a great example, right? Back in 2006, you know, although being very strong, being the solution architect, person go-to in the project, and being very, very strong in a technical field, you had that, you know, the high skilled, you know, in terms of emotional intelligence as well back then. And I think maturing, probably you are in a much better place, even more. So you are another example as well.
You're very
Excellent.
kind,
No, it's true, mate. It's true. It's absolutely true. You're very modest. So thanks so much for sharing your principles, you know, your way of thinking, couple of examples, good examples, success and failure examples. I think that's really vulnerable of you and authentic of you. Now we spoke about conflict management, right? Healthy debates. Venkat, having worked with Ren, I agree with that. Yes, you see, I'm not alone. It's true. Thanks, Venkat. Endorsing.
I'll have to pass on the $5 later.
No, nothing here was rehearsed.
I thought we agreed for more, Ram.
Healthy debates and healthy conflict. You know, we spoke about briefly the benefits of healthy debate, but in which stage you actually, as a leader, need to step up and say, hey, actually, this is too much. It's actually impacting the output, the performance of the team. So what are your thoughts around, healthy conflict in the team?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think, you know, we talk about in this topic focusing on the human skills. And so actually, in some ways, there's probably a natural tendency, I can say I've seen this myself, where because you're focused on, let's say, for example, engagement, or you're focused on behavior. So in meetings, you're focused on team norms. And because you put this extra focus, there's a spotlight there. And so what happens is very often you can you can basically actually jump at shadows, because what happens is you actually are really focused now on how are people feeling, how was that interaction, etc. And so sometimes when you see the conflict, you're like, oh, it's going bad. Okay, what should we do? But actually, a level of conflict is absolutely normal, right? Because if you don't have that, how do you have brainstorming? How do you have left field thinking? How do people test ideas? How do people feel clean or safe in innovation? So you need conflict. It's natural, and it's silly not to think it'll be there. I think where it is you've got to be able to really keep your antenna up, to be with the team and lean in with the team when they are calling things out, because you're not going to be in all the meetings, so you're not going to know. It's always going to come to you in general by hearsay. So just like any other information that's coming to you, you obviously have to triangulate. You need to talk to the individuals directly. But once you get to the point of understanding, no, this has gone beyond what you'd say, as you pointed, healthy conflict, then I think, to me as a leader, these are things that are expected of all of us, which is you really got to do it in an authentic manner. I think be as transparent as possible. It's about talking to those individuals, but also bringing them together. I mean, when I say bringing them together, you know, an example I had was I had 2 direct reports. There were 2 senior people who individually called one-on-ones with me, saying they couldn't work with the other person, right? Because of, you know, disagreement. And this wasn't my idea. I talked to a leader and then they recommended to do the following, and it worked perfectly. And so what it was, I organized a meeting where, you know, it wasn't a secret. I told the other person's going to be there. It's going to be the 3 of us. So I organized the meeting. We had a really open discussion, you know, about, well, why are we finding it difficult to work together? And we talked about it, you know, obviously in a professional manner. And I sort of arbitrated to a certain degree, but they were pretty good. But then what we did, and this was the idea of this leader, we actually said, okay, what about 2 or 3 things that you do not want to hear, see, or behaviors you don't want from the other person, and vice versa? And we did that. And they were actually quite reasonable things to expect. And then we sort of agreed that. I wrote it down as just a simple email, and then they actually worked effectively for the best part of 6 to 12 months. But it was because we actually took the time to do that. And I think, you know, whether you call that human skills or basic management, I think the one thing I would call out is conflict's normal. You'll be more attuned to conflict, I think, when you look at the human skills, but you need to not jump at shadows. But if it is something that needs your intervention, you really need to lean in and get involved, because otherwise, as a leader, you're not actually showcasing what the expectation you're going to have on the team when they see conflict that's not acceptable. So that's probably my thoughts. Matt.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ram. Very tricky balance, as you said before, Ram. And what comes to mind, I might take 30 seconds to share. Some of you might be familiar with the work from Patrick Lencioni. I can share the link later. He talks about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And the foundation of a healthy team is trust and healthy conflict. So very aligned with what you're saying. And another model that comes to mind, it's this idea of no triangles from Rachel Robertson. She was a leader leading a large team in Antarctica. And she talks about this idea of no triangles, which is exactly what you adopted there, Ram. You know, not allowing to, you know, those conversations to happen, you know, individually, but bringing people together and working as a mediator. Yeah. Good stuff. So, shall we continue, or any other thoughts around that, Ram?
I think, you know, and again, I'm still on this journey very much so. I think to me, probably one thing I didn't touch on is it's really important to think about how you build the team. And so for me, the thing about it is, if you like, you gotta, and again, this is probably a personal bias, I would rather ramp up a team slowly and actually find the right people to seed the team to get this, you know, get a critical mass of people who are on that journey together and then effectively move forward. But sometimes that's not practical. So in other words, no, we've got to ramp up 20 people by next month, etc. So then what I would say is then you've got to do the time as a leadership team to invest in certain questions that you're going to use during that recruitment phase, so that you can at least ask, instead of asking questions like, tell me how many times you've implemented blah, it's really thinking about what are the questions you want to ask. And the question could be, tell me about a time that you had a conflict with a team member. How did you go about it? They could be more around, can you tell me about, as a manager, how would I know that you're under stress? What would you want from me when you're in stress? So these types of questions, and there's many of them, you know, that I would use if I was recruiting. And I try to have enough questions on that side of the fence as they are the technology ones. And, you know, tell me about how you manage a complex technical problem and blah, blah. So to me, I think it's about that recruitment or the seeding of a team that then could almost build itself from there, because very often the norms build as a critical mass. So that's probably one thing. No.
Thanks, Ram. Having those situational behavioral questions in mind. Excellent. I'm conscious of time, so a few more questions before we wrap up, Ram. Number one, ritual for self-care. You know, self-care, it's something that we advocate here, the Mindful CIO community. We believe that we need to lead ourselves first before we can lead our teams and lead organizations. So what would you say is your number one ritual routine for self-care? I think I know the answer, but...
Yeah, you gave it away by saying, you know, I built that bunk bed. So yeah, I'm a hobby woodworker, definitely. So I love that. And I think it's kind of interesting actually, because in IT, like the amount of people I meet who are into woodworking and things. So it's quite interesting because, you know, we work on software, but, you know, we like to work on the hardware if you like. So I really enjoy it. I just find that it's something enjoyable. And then more on the, I guess, more the physical side, I love bike riding as well. It's funny, you know, I'm out at the Bureau of Meteorology, and the amount of people who bike ride there, and they do huge distances, you know, even some of them in competitions and all sorts of stuff. So I'm not at that level, but I love bike riding as well.
Cool. And mindful leadership, you know, being the mindful CIO community, mindful leadership, it's something that we advocate for as well. So when you think of mindful leadership, what comes to mind to you?
I mean, this is probably one for me, and I'm very much still working on this heavily. It's probably the concept of servant leadership. So for me, and this is definitely, it's a big area for me to work on, because I've got a long journey in this space. So, you know, to me, and I know it can mean many things, but to me, one particular part of servant leadership is effectively sort of leaving my ego at the door, thinking about how I can enable the team, regardless of what that could reflect on myself. And that's a journey I'm on, you know, to really focus on that, because it's one thing to support the team. Another thing is the support of the team could mean you're not the right person to lead the team. You know, there's lots of little dynamics that you need to go through in your head. And I really like the concept, but I'm still on the journey to getting there.
Cool. And Rem, of course, you were pretty busy, you know, with a young family and a big role, and you said yes to be here with us, you know, donate your time and your energy. Of course, we know each other more than a decade, but you know, I really appreciate your kind, you know, precious time. So, what is the value that you see in the mindful CIO community in being involved in such an initiative?
Yeah. And obviously we've chatted, you know, quite some time about what the community is, and then I was able to join, and then now I've had this opportunity. I think for me, it's magnificent, because it's simple. To me, the first thing is none of us are experts, and we're all growing, we're all learning and all that. And yes, the internet's an amazing resource, but to me, by actually conversing with people, hearing their experience, last time I was here, I wrote a couple of notes down, and I've actually thought of how I can incorporate them into my new role. So to me, it's a great resource. It's a community that we're building relationships within this community and outside. And ultimately, it's helping us on that journey together of learning and improving. So I think it's a great fit for me anyway.
Cool, thanks, Rem. Yeah, the intention is really to be a space for reflection and insight. So I'm glad that you took something away from the talk with Rob James last month. Cool. So to finalize, any final leadership lessons or final words that you have in mind you'd like to share with the group, Rem?
There's just one thing, and this is because it's literally something I learned on the role I'm on at the moment. And I only learnt this term after I'd gone through this journey, if you like, and it's called sunk cost bias. And I have this bias. And so basically sunk cost bias means effectively I've got a general tendency to be too optimistic about, oh, we'll eventually get this solved. And so on our program of work, we've had, you know, quite a lot of heavy lifting on the technology side. And very often I've, you know, as a team or as a group, we've invested so much in the design and the implementation and the testing. And it's like, oh no, we'll get there. We're going to get there. And, you know, you get SWAT teams and A teams and you throw more and more bodies at it and focus at it, when sometimes you really should actually pause or if not stop it. And so I think, you know, thanks to the leadership that I've worked with, I've actually learned that actually it's okay to say, yep, of course you've sunk a whole bunch of money into this, but this isn't going to get us anywhere, or let's have a checkpoint to determine should we keep going. And so to me, that's been a really big lesson on this current program for me, because of the scale of what we're doing, the daily burn rates, etc. It's a lot of money in the forward view, but it's also a lot of money in the rear view mirror. So it's a big thing to actually pause or stop, because what does that mean to everything you've invested? So that's probably something I'm on a journey on as well.
Cool. Thanks, Ran. And Michael just mentioned in the comments something that I heard you saying before, you know, the fail fast, embracing the fail fast instead, which is, you know, the exact opposite. Amazing, Rem. I'd love to have another 2 hours with you. Perhaps when we have the podcast, we're doing an extended session on that, but we'll probably need to give some space for people to digest, reflect, and discuss everything that you share, all the wisdom that you share, very humbly, very kindly, Rem. So I don't know if you need to dash off to have dinner or, you know, take care of things at home, but if you know have the time and energy to hang out with us, please do. Otherwise, if you need to say goodbye, totally fine. Awesome. Okay, beautiful. So thanks so much again on behalf of the Mindful CIO community. Thanks for your time, Rem. And real quick before we move into breakout rooms, our next speakers, super proud again, as much as this evening. In June, we have Rahu Caceres, who is long-term CIO in the not-for-profit space. Pretty much his whole career have worked all around the globe, and he's writing actually a book now that I've been privileged to review his first manuscript. So he'll be the guest speaker for us next month. He's CIO 50 in the last couple of years. And then in July, we have Semi, who is former CIO of Bupa, who was nominated the CIO of 2022 as well.